welcome to the show. Today our guest is Lisa Thomson. She's written a book called The Great Escape, A Girl's Guide to Leaving a Marriage. I wish I had that book when I was leaving my marriage years ago. I hope you enjoy this show.
Explorations. Probing global diversification. We travel the world so you don't have to.
I've always been interested in writing, but I didn't think that I would write a self-help book, which is it's kind of ironic in a way. I always, read lots of novels, literature type of stuff. But with the divorce process, when I was initiating the divorce, I was looking for resources, like for books that I could actually read and, explain to me, okay, this is what you need to do. And there really wasn't anything that I could find in my local area. So that kind of led me to think that maybe there was a niche for that, and a need for women who were going through the process, or I think especially starting the process themselves, rather than, I think it's quite different when it's on the other end. And I mean, also this book would definitely help for women who were, the man has decided to end the marriage. But however, I think initiating the process, like my whole first and second chapter, really deal with that part of the process and making that big decision.
When you made the decision, before that, did you consult with other women, talk with other women who have gone through something similar, or did this just sort of naturally evolve for you?
Well, it kind of naturally evolved. I mean, I didn't really have anyone in my circle that had gone through it. My sister had actually gone through a divorce many years before, and I did talk to her a little bit. But interestingly, she sort of advised me to just carry on in the marriage. So it wasn't really helpful as far as what to do.
Right.
So it was very much a introspective kind of process for me. I didn't really even confide in anyone. I might have had one friend that I was able to talk to. Because it is one of those things when you haven't actually formulated your plan, but you're really seriously considering it, it's really important to talk and have someone to talk to. But on the other hand, you don't really want it to turn into some sort of gossipy type of thing, So, so no, it was just really sitting and thinking about it myself and trying to read as much as I could. And, looking back now, there wasn't really, the internet just wasn't full of the information that it is now. There's so many great blogs out there and women who have gone through divorce that are writing about it now. And also, legal services that you can access on the internet. And that just wasn't really a thing then at that time. And that was like 2004. So you really sort of had to go out and find the resources. And that's when I realized that there really wasn't much available for people who are going through divorce, women or men, really. There was like maybe one or two books in the bookstores, and they were sort of centered more on trying to fix it, sort of like family-oriented, therapeutic type of books. So yeah, I was a little disappointed with that. But I do think today it is very much, there's more information and it's better for people starting the whole process.
Do you write mainly for women, or do you write for men and women?
Well, I do. I think my audience is mainly women, but there are some men that will come and read the blog. I've had a couple of men buy the book, so I don't know if they're buying the book for someone or if it's for themselves. Hard to say. But it's the focus is focused on women, but it could be really for anyone who was in a marriage and they were economically dependent on their spouse, and you've given up your career, say, for 10, 12 years out of the marriage, this would definitely apply to you as far as what steps to take to initiate the process if you needed to get out of that relationship. So some men would certainly relate to that.
Is this a purging thing for you, or did it start as something that you were trying to get off your shoulders and then turned into something a little more involved in terms of trying to help people?
Yeah, exactly. It really did kind of start maybe more as a purging, because I certainly was writing in a journal, and I started the beginning of the book was really taking parts of the journal and putting them into the book. And with the underlying reason for that being it may help other women who are going through a divorce. Because a lot of the stuff that was happening was quite unexpected to me. And I think it is, for a lot of people going through divorce, how you picture your divorce unfolding is very rarely the way it actually unfolds. So all of those experiences, I was journaling and I started to write about those, but I also wanted to make sure that the book was very practical. So I did, get right into what to do, how to hire a lawyer, what steps to take before you actually leave, or even have that discussion with your husband, because there's certain things that you can do to prepare. And I did some of those things myself, just partly common sense, but some things I didn't have a clue about. Like just, for example, figuring out exactly what your financial status is, marital status, as a couple, because one person could have debt that you're not aware of. You may not even really be technically aware of what the actual income that your spouse is earning. So I think it's important to do sort of an investigation before you even, talk to your spouse about what you're planning, and find out financially exactly where you stand as a couple, and because that's going to influence where you're going to be as an individual. Because you will be, whether it's assets or debt, you're going to be equally bound to both of those things.
So that must be a very strange time in your life then. You can't really talk to your spouse, yet you're already initiating this process in your own mind, going through the research and whatnot.
Yes, yeah, it's that's true, and so you have to really be fairly strong, I think, because it's really easy. And I was always I'm a very open person, so I always like to confide in my girlfriends, but in this kind of situation, I just didn't have the right support system to be able to just go around and say, well, this is what I'm thinking about doing, so what do you think? And I don't think it's that abnormal. I think a lot of people that are going through that feel that same way. And that's where something like this kind of book or a resource like this can really help a person. In fact, when I was going through the editing process of the book and designing the cover, I actually considered doing a paper cover on top, like blank.
Right.
Sort of to keep it kind of like an anonymous thing, or creating a blank cover that would go over top of the cover. But then it just sort of ended up being, it was a little bit too much creatively, and it would cost more money, and right. I wasn't sure how that would be received by people. But, the whole privacy issue, and because I think that's where you need this information, is you're just thinking about it, but you don't necessarily want to tell everyone.
Like getting Viagra in a brown paper bag, delivered to your house in a brown paper bag kind of thing.
Great analogy. That's fun.
Is divorce something, the process of divorce, I should say, is it like a cookie cutter type of approach to things? In other words, things seem to fall in place for all divorces, or do they take on unique aspects depending on the situation?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely not cookie cutter. I think every divorce is unique, and just as unique as each person that's in it. And, your neighbor might be getting a divorce, but that's going to be a completely different experience than the one that you're having. Just like every marriage is different, every divorce is different. But I think and that's actually, and this is probably getting into a different subtopic, but that's one of the problems I think with lawyers, is that sometimes they view your divorce as a cookie cutter situation that they can just push through the system, but not really looking at it as an individual situation with certain kinds of needs, because every case is different. But if you have a lawyer that's sort of looking at it like a cookie cutter situation, that can be kind of detrimental.
Right. So where are you at right now then with this whole thing? Not so much about the writing, but just personally. Are you happy with your current situation, or do you see yourself ever getting hooked up with some guy again?
Well, I am in a relationship
Oh,
now.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. So, in fact, we've been together for over 5 years, and yes, it's a completely different kind of relationship, to be honest. So yeah, I'm very happy. I mean, it's been, I think it's coming up 9 years now since I first was separated. So the divorce process itself took several years. Where I thought it might take a year, it ended up taking probably to actually from start to finish. It didn't finish till probably 2012.
Wow,
And
that's a long time.
it is, yes, it is.
Do you lose faith ever during that period? I don't know what you would lose faith in or gain faith about, but did you get
Yeah.
lost along the way at times?
Oh yeah, yes, definitely. You start to question what you're seeking legally. Is it worth it, or should you just throw your hands up and walk away with nothing? Kind of. But it was sort of a unique situation in that my ex-husband did appeal. We had a divorce trial, which was in itself unfortunate because when you get to the stage of having a trial, you just don't agree on whether it's splitting the assets or whether it's spousal support or child support. Although child support, you can't really argue about because that's really strictly dependent on the father or the mother's income. But spousal support is a negotiable part of the divorce, and obviously the division of assets. So those things are, if you can't agree, you find yourself unfortunately in a courtroom, which is no fun. And but then to carry it further, which is what my ex-husband did, he appealed it. He did a slip motion. He did all these bizarre. But I don't think he's unique. I think that this happens quite a bit. And in a way, if you were the economically dependent spouse, you sort of get victimized by the system because you need cash to fight. Or to defend, not fight, I shouldn't use that word, but to just defend yourself.
Yeah, to even hire the legal help that's necessary, among other
Exactly.
things. Among other things. Now, maybe we can go back to just a slightly itemized approach to how this happened to you. Without without trying to lay too much bare. But what did you see in your husband when you initially met him, and how did that change that created this situation in the end?
Well, I think I was 8 years younger than him. I was quite young. I think that I saw someone who was providing security. He was very charming. He was a little more mature than the other guys that I had been going out with. So it was sort of, taking me out for these nice dinners and that, kind of the sweeping you off your feet kind of situation. And the little twist there, of course, was that he knew my family quite well and worked for my father's business. So there was, I had known him for a while, so there was some familiarity there. But he has, fairly persuasive personality. He's a dominant personality. And I think that the fact that he was a bit older had that influence, was an easy influence. So that all kind of factored into it. And it didn't help. It didn't hurt that he did look a little bit like Paul McCartney and maybe a cross between Paul McCartney and Billy Joel. So, but I think it was just that age difference. In some ways, it appealed to me, but I think what I ended up learning is that it didn't work. And throughout as the marriage progressed, there was always sort of this power struggle, and it kind of was like a father and daughter relationship rather than an equal partnership.
I guess, I mean, in all situations, when you're meeting somebody, it's also a matter of timing and where you are in your life. I mean, given a decade later, you might have been much more perceptive about this whole thing right
Yeah.
away.
Yes. Yeah.
How did
Absolutely.
it affect your kids at the time? I mean, well, obviously you didn't have kids right away.
Hmm.
They sort of matured with the relationship as it started dissolving. Again, I guess it's sort of it's a story through time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. And the relationship changes over time. People change over time, and to expect someone to stay the same is ridiculous because when you think about it, we're all evolving creatures, right? So everybody changes over time, but speaking of the children, I think something that's interesting and also important to point out is we weren't one of those couples that fought all the time. And so if you were on the outside looking in, you wouldn't necessarily say, oh, geez, what are those two doing to get together? Although I think some people were saying that for other reasons, not so much this obvious fighting, and which is often what you expect when people get divorced, is that, well, they must have been fighting all the time, or had an abusive relationship. So for those reasons, in some ways it wasn't really obvious to the children, but intuitively it was there, and they were aware of it. Because my ex had anger issues, and he had a lot of anger the last few years that we were married. I could never really figure out where that was all coming from. But that would spill over onto the kids. And so they were aware of those kind of problems. But yeah, so it wasn't like an obvious type of thing. And that's partly why I wrote the book as well, because I think a lot of people expect that. They think, well, if he's abusive, physically abusive, you should leave. But sometimes there's just a lot of problems that people can't see, and it's really a very personal decision. So that's the first chapter of my book. I kind of deal with that whole idea of what we're supposed to feel and what we actually really feel. So, just because you have a nice house and a nice car and you go on holidays once a year with your family or your husband, that doesn't mean you're happy. That doesn't mean it's a successful marriage. It might look successful, from what society deems successful. But if there's nothing else going on underneath that, then none of it matters,
Right. Yeah. Like not even your closest relatives, your family, they didn't really have a sense of what was going on?
Actually, yes, they did. Especially, well, I'm going to say in the middle and then at the end, they did. In fact, my mother told me that my father said, well, how does she put up with him?
Really?
That was sort of towards the end. But interestingly, when the time did come for the divorce to happen, and when the shit hit the fan, for lack of a better term, my family sort of, it's almost like they forgot. I think they just kind of was wishful thinking. They were just maybe concerned about what would happen because he worked at their company, and how the divorce would affect that aspect of it.
Was there any moment, was that sort of moment where the straw broke the camel's back, or was it an evolving thing in terms of your relationship with your husband? Was there like a seminal moment?
Yeah, well, it was very much evolving. I mean, we went into couples therapy at one point in the marriage, but it's, I think probably in the last 2 years, things kind of built up into a pitch of just, and also it's almost like things start happening that you can't really understand why these things are happening until you look back and you see it.
Right.
And and it's sort of a funny example, but we were actually moving. Actually, that might have been one of the the straw that broke the camel's back. Because we lived in a home for 14 years, and we had our kids there, and so there were some good memories there and not so good memories, but there was but that was 14 years, and we made a home there. And when leading up to that move, there was just a lot of mixed feelings, and I happened to sprain my foot right before you move. I mean, that's just bad timing. You're trying to pack and you're hobbling along, and it just seemed like in that moment that everything was starting to fall apart. And we, in the meantime, were moving into a beautiful dream home that we'd built. So it was kind of, again, ironic in a way. But I remember when I sprained my foot, he went to the drugstore the next day because I couldn't walk on it. I couldn't put any weight on it. And he went to the drugstore to get me some crutches. And he brought them home. Excuse me, he brought them home, and then he just left for the whole day. It was a Sunday. And he just left for the whole day and left me with the kids. And I remember thinking, that wasn't once again, how insensitive can you possibly be? And the crutches were too big. So so it hurt. It's like, couldn't you even tell them how tall I am so that they would know what size of crutches to give you? I don't know. The move itself was absolute chaos. And, moves always are. But these kind of events tend to either bring up bad things or good things. And in this case, it just seemed to sort of bring up a lot of bad stuff. And then his anger, and just when we should have been happy, he was unhappy. And when he should have been grateful, he was angry. So yeah, it was definitely an evolving thing, but it certainly in the last year or two, there were a lot of things that were building up.
So how did he react then when you first told him that, listen, I want a divorce?
He was fearful. He was desperate. He basically begged. But I had made up my mind. I mean, I'd already given him many chances before. So there was no convincing me. I had made up my mind, but I wanted to go about it as cordially as we possibly could. But because he was so opposed to it, and because a lot of his identity was wrapped up in our marriage, he worked for my father's business, and he had always worked there. He didn't start working there when we got married, but he worked there before for many years, but he kind of worked his way up. And I think that he was a very insecure, and the loss of me would have been, he felt that everything would come crumbling down, that he would lose his job, which was absolutely ridiculous because he, like I said, had worked there for a long time. But all these things must have been going on in his mind. I think it was more of a security, not love, but security.
Right. Yeah. I mean, people often do things for security, and love doesn't necessarily enter the picture in a lot of cases. Like they get married for security, in the first place.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
What kind of impact did it have on you then? You were saying that he was feeling a little insecure. Obviously, you're worried about the future and how you're going to survive, where your money's going to come from, and that kind of thing. You must have started some kind of contingency plan thinking ahead of time then.
Well, no, not enough.
No?
Not enough, no, because he earned a really good income, and I wasn't concerned that I wouldn't get spousal support based on that income. So I had sort of a foolish sense of security that way, in thinking that it would all be fine. There were more than enough resources to go around, and I would figure out what I was going to be doing. Obviously, I wasn't going to be at home forever with kids or anything, but the kids were 10 and 12, so they were it was sort of that timing where there's a lot going on at school, there's a lot going on with their sports. So it was a very busy time that way with them. But yeah, so financially I just figured that it was fairly cut and dried, and that we would, settle it out with the lawyers, or even amongst ourselves. I was that naive. That's why I wrote the book. Because hopefully I'm just hoping that, I can give other women just a bit of a leg up there and sort of, preparing a little bit better than I did. I mean, this, most of the book is based on my mistakes.
Right, right.
So
So,
yeah.
talking then about the your desire, obviously, to help other people through this, something that you've gone through. You're writing a book. You blog. Do you have interaction? Do you have workshops or interactions or any of that kind of thing as well?
I haven't, not yet. It's something that I'm thinking about doing. And it's a question of whether to do a in-person type of workshops in the community or whether to do it on internet, with Google Hangouts. You can do different kinds of things. And that's, I sort of look at that as like divorce coaching in a way. And I've kind of steered away from that. I don't want to be a divorce coach. I know that a lot of women are, and it's fantastic. And I could have used one when I was going through my divorce. But I just think for me, it's more about the writing and less about, okay, I'm a divorce coach now. I mean, I don't really want my divorce to be the thing for me. I think by writing, I'm reaching more people than spending the time of.
So yeah, you were mentioning about the different kinds of things that you try and talk about with your wine diaries.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, like I say, it's very, very much more personal. But something I wanted to mention too is with each blog post that I do, I always ask myself, why are you writing this before I actually write it? Because I try to sort of stay away from just writing for the sake of writing about myself and saying, inventing or talking about stuff that isn't going to help someone else. So there is always, with everything I've published, there's usually a reason, there's an underlying way that it's going to help my reader. Otherwise, because I have to be kind of careful. I mean, I really technically want to protect, my kids. I don't want to be exploiting certain experiences. Like I haven't written about certain things just for that reason. So I try to balance it with temper my innermost thoughts with, questioning myself. Okay, well, why are you writing this? So I usually have a good reason for writing something.
So looking at the future then as a writer, do you foresee yourself expanding on that, maybe writing a novel at some point, maybe writing a fiction, something like that? Is that in the back of your mind at all?
Yeah, actually, I do write some fiction, and actually that's even a better way to, write about experiences, and you can weave in some of your personal experiences into a character and make them even more dramatic. So, it's really quite fun, and I'm actually working on a collection of short stories right now that are actually, each character is going through, it's really about relationships, but each character is going through a divorce. But how different every circumstance is and how different each character is. And, one character might have left and the other one has been left. So they're all different situations, but it's a really fun way to, and I think that's actually even more purging and cathartic than writing my own experiences. Because I'm always in the back of my mind thinking, okay, do you really want to share this with the world? I mean, think about it.
Then,
yeah.
Just the wine diaries. Talk to me about the metaphor. Obviously, you enjoy wine, and you do things that enhance your enjoyment of wine. I'm sure you've probably gone on a wine tour or two.
Yeah.
Just tell me a little bit more about your association with wine, then.
Yeah. Well, I mean. Wine is, I always say, a day without wine is a day without sunshine. It's just my motto. But, obviously, you have to, like I say, you have to be in moderation because you don't want to have too much of it. But it's, wine is just, makes life beautiful. And I just liked the idea that pairing the writing with the wine, because I think it's just a nice way to tie in and bond with my readers. Because then they can say, oh yeah, I tried that wine and I really liked it, or and giving each other wine suggestions is always fun. And also, like I will sometimes pick a wine that's cheap, and then sometimes I'll pick a wine that's a little more pricey. And it's interesting because sometimes the cheaper wines actually taste better. So it's kind of fun that way. I try to, try different ones. And I was going to say one of the wines that I did pick was called Dirty Laundry. And I thought that was appropriate. So sometimes it's just the name of the wine. I'll go, you know what, this sounds about right. And another time I wrote a post about a friend, an old friend of mine from childhood. And she actually took her own life. And I found out we all found out about it about a week after it happened. And many of my childhood friends, we had sort of lost touch. So when we found out about this, we were all very sad, very shocked. And, one of the first things you think to yourself is, oh, I should have been in touch with her. So one of my blog posts was about this friend and really just about the friendships in general, because we all ended up coming together. Like that event caused us to rebond, which is great. And we still now get together twice a year and have a girls get together and reminisce. And we always light a candle for her. But the wine that I chose for that post was called Barefoot. And it's a California wine. It's not very expensive, but I chose Barefoot because one of my memories of her was jumping on her trampoline in her backyard. And I think we were 14, and putting the water on the trampoline and all of us on there at the same time. And we just had so much fun, so many good memories of that age. And of course, as we talked about earlier, people change. And that's just one of the rules of life, when people change. But you have these memories, right? So that's sometimes how I choose a wine, is just based on, maybe it's dedicated to a person that I've written about, or, subject. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not a wine snob. So I'm open to pretty much anything. And I also enjoy red and white equally. So I swing both ways. So I like to tell people. Yeah. So I think a lot of people enjoy wine that way. And the last post I wrote about was actually about whether you should do cheap wines or expensive wines. So that was in the wine diary. So that was more just focused on a wine post. And so I veered off a little bit there, but that was kind of a fun one to do. And also a wine tour. I did a little diary of, photos of a wine tour that my boyfriend and I went on. And he doesn't drink wine. So it's really fun to go on a wine tour with him because he can drive me around and I can taste as many as I want, and I don't have to worry about driving. So it's really nice. And he just waits and looks around.
You do have the perfect relationship then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you take a certain amount of pride in finding a good wine and then telling people about it?
Oh, yeah, sure. It's always fun to discover something that isn't, $40 a bottle. Maybe it's $15 a bottle and it tastes pretty good. And so, yeah, it's always fun to share those. And I know, like with my girlfriends, we'll get together and I'll usually bring, I should really be honest here. We kind of refer back to our favorites. So it's not like we're always trying new ones, but it's always fun, like with the girlfriends, to get together and try something different. Yeah. And we usually do a wine tour once a year. So.
The crazy gals get together, eh? Wine tour, strip club, whatever it takes, eh?
Hey, that's a good idea. That sounds fun.
In any way, and we've probably touched on this, is your wine tour writing and your book on the divorce, The Great Escape. Do they relate to each other anyway, linearly? Do you think? I mean, obviously, The Great Escape is something that you've experienced, and it's kind of over with. The wine thing you're still experiencing.
Yeah, that's true. But I think they are definitely related, because a lot of the experiences that I'm still having are in some way still kind of related to the experience of the divorce. But not always, not always. But it's still, like the very first post I did was about how I came to my decision. And I think I'm really actually very proud of that post, because it really did sort of delve into I feel put the reader right into the chair beside me, I hope. So yeah, no, I think the blog is definitely related to that. But the last post I did just being on wine really had nothing to do with divorce. And as it turns out, one of my favorite singers actually owns a vineyard. So I put a little clip of his playing the guitar and at his vineyard. So just really, kind of a fun post that way. But yeah, certainly a lot of the experiences, and sometimes it's experience with family or children, I will write about there. And I know my next post coming up is talking about what it's like to live in an apartment now. Because I always, I always lived in a home. And when I was married, the last home we were in was a dream home, and it was just, a gorgeous big kitchen, with the 2 wall ovens and a wine fridge. So, my life has changed a lot, but it's, I've never been happier. So it's I think it's interesting because we have so much tied up so much of our image is tied up in what we have and in our homes and the cars we drive. So I thought it was interesting to sort of tap into that whole difference between, being house proud and being an apartment dweller, because it's 2 different things. But I think it's important to appreciate what you do have, no matter how small. So that's my next post coming up. And I also, again, I think a lot of divorced people can relate to that, because a lot of times, part of that process is downsizing or, either going to a smaller home, an older home, or even, an apartment. Sometimes that happens too. So,
yeah, well, big changes.
Yeah. And I think, and the whole point being, you shouldn't be ashamed of that. There's nothing wrong with that.
Oh, absolutely.
You can still, there's a lot of really great things about being in an apartment too. So, just topics like that.
Yeah, you can go skydiving.
Yeah.
Especially from the very top. Yeah, you need something though, so you have a nice soft landing. You don't want a hard landing.
Good idea, yeah. Don't try that without any protection.
You mean like a condom?
So, did you learn something? Lisa Thomson Live can be found on the internet at Lisa Thomson Live. For Explorations, I'm Nina Hilger.